Hey y'all, I am going to answer some questions that you all asked. If you hear strange noises, that's my dog. She is doing dog stuff. I was hoping that she would take a nap while I was recording, but she is chewing on a stick that she brought inside. So just doing dog things. Okay. So the first question that I got was from Molly, and Molly asked a couple questions. First was, I would love some resources or options on where to find resources on native plants for specific regions. So there are quite a few good resources on for this. The main ones that I would recommend would be the Lady Bird Johnson Center through the University of Texas, which you can find at wildflower.org, wildflower singular. Let me share my screen. Okay, so this is the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. And I really like this tool because you can get like really specific with what you're searching for. So you can search by state or province. So it also has Canadian provinces and states. So if I was searching for me, I could go with Kentucky. That's where I live. Um, and then you can go by herbs versus shrubs, trees, grasses, etc. Or search for everything. Herbs would be like your perennial flowers. Lifespan, so you can search all durations, annual, biannual, or perennial. So I'm going to search for perennial. And then you can also search by your site conditions. So sun, part shade or shade, and then water. So I'll put medium. And then you can go even farther. You can go to the bloom time, the bloom color, height, leaf arrangement, and leaf retention. And I hit search, and it came up with 144 species for what I searched for. And then each one, you can click on it, and it gives you like really detailed information about the species. So it gives you like the common names. It gives you like a little rundown. There's photographs, um, like size class, bloom color, bloom time, the states that it's native to, and the provinces that it's native to, um, and then the growing conditions, light requirements, soil, um, yeah, all of the things. Some species will have more information than others, but I love this resource. I think it's really great. And then the other one that is helpful is the Native Plant Finder from the National Wildlife Federation. This is at nwf.org/native plant finder. You can also just Google native plant finder. So what this does is it's a little less specific with the actual species, but it tells you the native plants that are most needed and beneficial in your zip code. So like right now I have the zip code for a client. So let me put in my zip code. Um, and so you can search by plants or by butterflies. So then it'll show you flowers and grasses, trees and shrubs. So like for my area, the first one that is most beneficial is goldenrod. And it says here it's the host plant for 105 caterpillars, so caterpillar species. And I can click on that. And it'll say some of the species that are native to your area. But what I would do, because it doesn't really give you a ton of like species. It mostly gives you the genus. So I would go and take this genus into um, the wildflower.org tool, and then you can get more specific. So everything was native to Kentucky. And if you were looking for your specific site conditions, you can narrow that. But here there's like 56 Solidago species that are native to Kentucky. And then it should also say, yeah, the actual caterpillars that use this as a host plant. So if you're interested in that, that's fun. I guess it doesn't list all of them. It says our top 15. Um, so this is a useful tool that I hope that they continue to expand on it. But they have put just like a ton of research and time into it. So great tool, 10 out of 10. Native Plant Finder from the National Wildlife Federation and wildflower.org for finding plants. Okay, let me stop sharing. Okay, so she had more questions. She also asked what plants are helpful to plant together, which shouldn't be planted near each other. So when you're thinking about what to plant together, the biggest thing is you want to plant by water need. So you want to put all the thirsty plants together and then put all the dry plants together or medium, depending on your site, so that you're not, you know, you don't have like one really thirsty species next to a drier species, and then you're like wasting water because the dry species didn't need that much water if you're irrigating. And then you also want to consider height and spacing needs for the plant, because you don't want to plant something, um, if the sun is coming, the background thing makes it hard to see my hand, but so if the sun is coming this way and you plant something that is 6 feet tall here, and then you plant something that is 3 foot tall behind it when the sun's coming this way, there's going to be a shadow from the 6 foot tall plant that's going to shade out the 3 foot tall plant. So you want to know which direction the sun's coming from for sure, and then make sure that you're planting things that aren't going to shade each other out. And then you also want to be sure that they have enough space. I am a fan of planting things kind of close together, but you will want to make sure that they're not so close together that they're gonna be competing, because that causes problems with the soil and stuff. You want to make sure that all of the leaves are able to get sun as much as possible. And then Molly also asked, I would like to know about planting native trees and bushes. So it's not, you know, much different than planting anything else. You want to make sure you know how big that tree or bush is going to get as far as width and height, so that you know that you have enough space for it, because you don't want to end up with something that's way too big for where you planted it, or it's going to cause all kinds of problems. And also, like, remember that the size that you're buying the tree is a lot smaller than the size it'll be when it's done. So it might look like the space is empty when you're first planting it, and then it can be tempting to plant other things around it because it looks empty, but really, like, you need to make sure there's enough space for the root system, for how big it's going to get, um, and then planting stuff around it when it isn't established yet can cause problems and have things outcompete each other. My bottle disappears. You don't know what I'm drinking. Could be anything. Um, So yeah, and then also make sure that you mulch around it, but don't volcano mulch. So just, a flat layer, a couple inches of mulch. Um, that'll help the soil, help with water retention and all that. And then also with anything that you are getting established, make sure that it's getting enough water at first. Um, Once your native plants get established, they don't need a lot of irrigation because they're adapted to your climate and how much water, how much rainfall you get. But when you're first putting it in the ground, it's going to need to get established and deal with the being transplanted and its roots being somewhere new. So just make sure it is watered enough when you first plant it. And then Molly had another question, which is totally fine, totally great. Thank you, Molly, for all the questions. Um, as far as compost, I'd love to know what kinds of options there are and which is easiest to get started with, common issues, and how to prevent them or rectify them. So yeah, a lot of people get overwhelmed by the concept of composting. It's really not as scary as it sounds. Um, if so, the four types of composting that I would recommend, and they all have their own pros and cons depending on what you're doing, how much effort you want to put in, and how long you are able to wait. Um, so the four types would be cold composting, which is where you pretty much just make a pile outside and leave it be for like 6 months to a year at least. Um, Vermicomposting is when you make a worm bin, you get red wiggler worms, preferably, and you put them in a container, and then you put all your food scraps in there, and the worms do the heavy lifting. And then thermal slash hot compost, whatever you want to call it, is when you have all of your material that you're composting at once, and you make one big pile in layers of brown material and green material and manure. You have to have either manure or some sort of really high nitrogen material that will create the um, thermal, create the heat. Uh, and that could be things like alfalfa meal or kelp meal or blood meal or bone meal, all things that you can buy if you don't have access to manure or don't have access to manure that hasn't been that wasn't from animals that have been treated with antibiotics or dewormers. So that's going to be kind of it's the requires the most from you, but it's also the fastest. And then the fourth one is bokashi, which comes from Korean natural farming, and you're essentially fermenting the compost. And you have to start with a culture that you can buy, which is called EM, and um, it's kind of like kombucha culture. So, but that allows you to compost meat and dairy. Basically, you can compost anything that decomposes in bokashi, which is nice, especially if you have a lot of those scraps from meat and dairy and things like that. Um, it is kind of in between in terms of the setup and how much it takes from you, and also in between as far as how long it takes. So for you saying that you want something easy to get started, I would recommend I love a worm bin personally because the all of the microbes that you need exist in the worm's gut. So you know that you're getting the good microbes. And it's faster than just a cold compost, just a pile. Um, and it's kind of fun to have worms if you like worms. I like bugs. Um, There are lots of tutorials on how to build the bin. You just need a container, basically, that's plastic or something that's not gonna decompose. And then it needs to have holes in it for air, which you can just get so mine is like a stupid background. You can't see my hands. I don't know. It's one of those tubs that you can get from Lowe's for like a couple bucks. And then I just drilled holes. You want holes all around it in the bottom, the sides, and the top so that it gets lots of oxygen. Um, and you want to put a lid on it so that your worms don't leave and that things don't get into it. Um, and as far as common problems, the biggest thing would be things becoming anaerobic, or meaning without oxygen. Because she doesn't really need oxygen, but that's a whole different thing. So, in terms of if you're doing a worm bin, the biggest thing is going to be making sure there's enough air in there. So, you can do that by, if you're adding like sticks and things, kind of like layering it so that it's not all super compact. You want to make sure there's holes on the bottom, or that there's a spigot or something that you can get rid of any excess water or liquid. Um, and then you can use that liquid as a fertilizer as long as it doesn't smell bad. So compost should not ever smell bad. If it does, that means something's wrong, it's anaerobic. Um, it can also happen if you have too much green material and not enough brown material. So your green material are things like food scraps and green leaves, grass clippings, that kind of stuff. And then the brown material is like cardboard and paper and brown leaves and that kind of stuff. So the ideal ratio would be 60% brown material to 40% green material. So make sure that if you're putting a lot of food scraps in the bin, that you are supplementing with things like cardboard, paper towels, paper towel rolls, tissues, all that kind of stuff can be composted, and that's brown material. Um, so yeah, make sure it does not smell bad, and it should be all right. Okay, I think that answers Molly's questions. And then Bella asked on the composting note, if I can only do cold composting, what should I do with weeds that I pick, burn them, or solarize? So she's asking this because cold composting doesn't kill seeds. Hot composting does. If you do thermal compost, it'll kill all the seeds and it'll kill any pathogens. I happen to know that Bella has a cold compost pile in her garden, um, where she's just piling stuff up. So if the weeds that you're pulling have not gone to seed yet, then it's not a problem at all. You can put them in your cold compost, um, because really the issue is just seeds. So if it, like the roots and everything, will die and will not come back. It's not gonna create weeds growing in your garden using the compost unless there are actual seeds. So you can pull the weeds before they get to seed, which is ideal, but sometimes things happen. Um, if they have already gone to seed, you could separate out the seeds, just cut off the parts that are seeded, and cold compost the rest of the material. But yes, you can definitely also burn things, and you can make biochar out of burnt organic material, which is pretty much what biochar is. And biochar is really helpful, especially for retaining water and retaining nutrients in the soil. So if you have stuff that's gone to seed and you are worried about it in your cold compost, then yeah, burn it and then use that burnt material in the soil. And the seeds will be burnt and dead, and your soil will be happy. Um, okay. Rudena. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, and I am really sorry. Please forgive me. But hopefully that's close. Um, she said that she is a veterinarian who's relocating from LA to upstate New York and is transitioning out of being a veterinarian into studying honeybee medicine, which feels like a gateway to helping native bees. And she asks, is there a good source that lists native bees or pollinators by region with the native plants that they are particularly connected to slash have evolved with? Um, so the native plant finder that we just talked about, let me share again. So this will show you it'll show you caterpillars, so butterflies and moths. It does not have bees at the moment. Maybe one day they'll add bees to it. Um, you can search by butterfly versus by plant on here. So this has my zip code in it already. You just enter your zip code and it brings stuff up for your region. So these are all native moths and butterflies. And if you click on it, it will tell you the host plant. Um, you also can just look at the native plants that they say are the most important for your region, and plant those, knowing that it's going to be a host plant for however many species of caterpillars. So 74 species use native sunflowers in my area. That is probably going to be the easiest tool. If you really are looking, excuse me, for information on native bees, I looked to see if there was a tool like this that is about bees, and I could not find it, which is unfortunate. I hope that someone is working on that. Maybe I will eventually. But there is this website that I've been using lately to look for um, insects, non-butterfly caterpillar insects that are threatened or endangered or declining. And this is a global tool, so you can use it anywhere and find declining species. It's a little extravagant in like how detailed you can get, but you can go by, let's see, land regions. So North America, actually, let's see if I can. So you can zero in on your area and go to the United States. I'm not gonna, go through all of this, but basically you would go to your state. You said you're moving to New York, so you would narrow it down to New York and then go to taxonomy. So they have like everything, like the whole animal kingdom and plant kingdom. So we're looking at insects. So you're the animal kingdom and then arthropoda are insects. And then you can narrow it down even farther from there to get to bees. So eventually you'll get to bees. So and then it'll show you here like these are all extinct, the EX is extinct, uh, critically endangered, uh, regular endangered, etc. Vulnerable and then threatened and all of that stuff. So let me find a B. At the top there was a B. Franklin's bumblebee. I'm not sure the range, but it's critically endangered. But it does show you. So when you click on the species, then go to habitat and ecology, and in here it'll tell you like these are the um, plants that it needs. So it's not as, you know, user friendly maybe or like quick and simple as a native plant finder, but it does give you the answers for that. And this is iucnredlist.org, iucnredlist.org, and you can search for bees that need help. But the thing that I want to say about this also is if you are trying to conserve native bees, you want to be careful with honeybee keeping. And this is, I've been working on research about this to make a post on social media about the problems, the ecological problems of honeybees in North America. So I know that people don't want to hear it, so I've been a little reluctant, but let me tell you about what the Xerxes Society, which is an international invertebrate conservation society that does really great research work. And they have this file. It's a paper, I guess, about the impacts of honeybees. And they have some considerations to take before you are starting honeybee hives, which I don't hate honeybees. Okay. I grew up around honeybees. My grandma kept them for many, many years. And then she stopped, and now she's recently gotten back into it. I know that honey is very nutritious, it is good for human health. I am an allergy sufferer, so I am very aware that getting local honey is very useful for human beings. Um, and also for people to sell and make money and all those things. So I don't hate honeybees, but we have to be careful when we are raising them outside of agriculture. They're fine on a big farm because there's so much that needs to be pollinated. But when you're getting into a smaller area, you need to consider that they could outcompete native bees. Um, so their recommendation is to that each apiary should have no more than 20 hives, and then each apiary should be separated by at least 4 miles. Um, and that you need to consider, is there enough ecology to support both the honeybees and the native bees? Is there a problem with invasive plant species in your area because the honeybees are going to pollinate the invasives and increase seed production of invasive species? So you want to keep that in mind. Um, are you near endangered or threatened pollinators? Like, are there um, endangered insects in your area that they would outcompete? Um, and Rudania, so sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. I feel so bad. But I can send you this PDF about all the things that should be considered before starting honeybees outside of agriculture. if that is something that you would like to read. Let me know. Okay, next question. Liv asked me, what is your background or training? I'd love to break into native horticulture, but I have no formal training. So my background is I have a Master of Science degree in sustainable design. The program was like mostly architecture based, but I was able to do landscape stuff in my master's program because it's technically the College of Architecture and the Built Environment, and they consider landscaping the built environment. So I was able to do that. So I do have formal landscape architecture training. I'm not a licensed architect, and I don't want to be, but I do have the training that I could be. Um, but here's the thing: I have some master certificates. I have uh, design of resilient communities certification and sustainable leadership certification, and then I am also um, working on my regenerative soil certification, which is online, which is the important point here. You do not need formal training to do most things, honestly. Like, don't, I have degrees because I thrive in academia, but I am very aware that most people do not. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you can learn everything that you want to learn on the internet because it is 2022 and we have access to so much information. So, like, honestly, I've learned more through online courses, books, YouTube videos than I learned in my whole time in academia. So, of course, you can come to my course that I am going to be starting at the beginning of September, and I will teach you the things to get you started. Of course, you don't have to. Also, there's a million free, just like get on YouTube and just like watch a bunch of stuff. Or if you like to read, read a bunch of stuff, listen to audiobooks. Um, and depending on what you're trying to do exactly, like that's gonna kind of dictate what you need as far as training. If you want to work for someone else, you could definitely start like an entry level working at a nursery, plant nursery, or with like a landscaping company. But both of those things, as far as like, the ecological sustainability parts are not going to be there because as most garden centers and landscapers don't give a shit about the environment and don't actually know anything. So beware of that. Beware of things like master gardener certifications. Like, sure, you can do that, but most master gardeners do not know about the importance of native plants or know anything about soil or give a shit about insects and wildlife. So I would say personally, my personal opinion would stay away from master gardener certifications. I think it's kind of a waste. Uh, I would look more into permaculture certifications. If you want to work for yourself, then you just need to know what you're doing and to be able to prove to other people that you know what you're doing. So certifications can be helpful in the way that they are kind of like proof to people that you know what you're doing, but there, a million ways to get certified in a ton of different things on the internet. Don't have to go to school. Um, or you could just build a portfolio or um, some way to prove to people that you know what you're talking about and then go from there. It all just kind of depends on what you're trying to do. But also, like, the best thing about this kind of work is that, like, it's so needed and so few people are doing it compared to how many people need to be doing it. That's a very undersaturated market. And we are all like, everyone that I've talked to and like starting my business and getting into this has been very helpful. Very, like, it's not like competitive. I don't feel like we're competing against each other. I feel like we're all working together because we need as many people doing this work as we can get to be able to restore our planet before it's too late. So definitely reach out to all the people, ask me more questions. I talk to Liv on Instagram pretty regularly. So I'm happy to answer more questions. And like I said, come to my class that I'm teaching and that'll get you started. Okay, next question. Daniel asked, how does soil building help the climate? Love this question because I love talking about soil and climate. So there are a few ways that building the soil helps the climate crisis. Um, one of them is that it has a lot to do with the symbiotic relationship between plants and soil. So when plants photosynthesize, they breathe in carbon dioxide, breathe out oxygen, as we know. But when they're breathing in carbon dioxide, they are sequestering it through it goes through their whole system and out the roots into the soil, where it is stored as carbon instead of carbon dioxide. And soil that is rich in carbon is very healthy soil, and plants need carbon to be healthy. So it is much safer to have that much carbon in the soil than to have carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, where it is a greenhouse gas. Um, and then when we disturb the soil through tilling or erosion, or we just like let it die off, then that carbon turns back into carbon dioxide and is released into the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas. So I think like soil is the solution to the climate crisis because all you need is soil, plants, water, and the sun. And that is the most efficient way to harvest the power of the sun, the energy from the sun, into the soil. So there's that. There's also the fact that erosion has caused a huge problem because so much soil has eroded into our oceans, and that has changed the pH of the water, which is not good. And the change in pH of the water from the soil that's eroded into the ocean is killing the coral reefs. And coral reefs make half of the world's oxygen. Half of the world's oxygen. That's a lot. And obviously, we need oxygen. And right now, oxygen levels on Earth are the lowest they've been in recorded history. So if we kill all the coral reefs, basically there won't be breathable air. So there's that, which is pretty important. Drink. The other way is water retention. So soil is supposed to be able to retain like just a fuck ton of water, like way more than its own weight in water, like 10 times. I can't think of the actual number, but it's a lot. And because the soil is so low in organic matter and has been so degraded and so messed up over thousands of years, it no longer, most soil doesn't hold water the way that it is supposed to. And then we get things like puddling and things. Soil's not supposed to puddle. And all that water that's supposed to be in the ground just like the CO2, is in the atmosphere. So then we have all of this excess water vapor in the atmosphere, and that contributes to the extreme weather that we see, the really big storms, flooding, hurricanes, all that stuff. So yeah, soil is, in my opinion, our biggest ally in the climate crisis. Okay, Josh asked this question that I really love. Is it unethical or impractical to cut down a tree in order to install solar panels? So the reason I like this question is because it the answer is there's a lot of nuance and complexity to it. And I think we need to be able to, in the times that we live in, we need to be able to understand nuance, and we need to be able to do cost benefit analysis. So there is not a yes or no question of this. It depends on the situation. So what kind of tree is it? Is it a big established oak tree, or is it an invasive tree of heaven? Because not there's kind of this thought that it's like a tree is a tree and all trees are good. It's not true. Just like any other plants, there are invasive trees, lots of them. I pull a tree of heaven out of my yard every day, pretty much. Um, so if it's an invasive tree, obviously you don't want it there in the first place. If it is a non-native tree that's also not invasive, um, that can come with its own problems, even though it's not going to spread and outcompete everything. It's probably not very sturdy, and it has the potential to fall over and cause damage to whatever's around it. Um, so question one is, what kind of tree is it? If it's a non-native tree, cut it down, I guess, if that's what you want to do. If it is a native tree, then there's more questions, which are still, what kind of tree is it? Right? Because like in my area, we have southern catalpa trees, and they're native, but they're everywhere. So like if you have a southern catalpa tree and there's, six more right over there, then it's okay. Um, but if it's something that is like really more beneficial or rare, or something that hosts a lot of insects like oak trees, and you can pull up the native plant finder and it has trees also, and you can look at how important is this tree to my area if it's native. You also want to consider, how big is the tree? How well established is it? Or is it dying? I mean, if you have a big oak tree that's 200 years old and huge and thriving, please don't cut it down for anything, including solar panels. Um, versus if it is a young tree that's not fully established, it's not, as big of a deal. Um, or if it is a tree that is not thriving, it's having trouble, it's got disease or pests, or some kind of invasive insect eating it, then maybe it needs to come down regardless. You also want to consider, how efficient is the solar panel that you're installing, um, because there are different levels of efficiency. Is it going to really reduce your electric usage? How much is it going to reduce it? A significant enough amount to where it's if it's a the tree is native and like, kind of established and like it's beneficial, but not the, most important tree, uh, how much is it going to save you in electricity? And you also want to consider if this tree is in your yard, is it shading your house? And then that also depends on the climate that you live in. But say you live somewhere where it's hot in the summer and you have this big tree that's shading your house, that is actually doing a lot more than you probably know for how much air conditioning you're going to need, because the shade from that tree is going to keep your house from heating up excessively. And then without the tree, your electric bill would be more. So again, it's nuanced, it's complex. There's a lot of things to consider. This question was asked by Josh. Josh, if this is I don't know if this is like a theoretical question that you were just wondering about, or if it's something that you are actually working on doing. If you are actually doing this, then totally feel free to DM me or email me if you need help finding the answers to all the questions that need to be answered before you make your decision. And I'll be glad to help you figure that out. Eva asked, what's a plant that's colorful and native to the Midwest under a walnut tree? Um, I feel like people ask a lot about like colorful plants. And most natives, the flowers are pretty colorful. I mean, not all of them, but I'm also like, what color? What color do you want? But I did find a few suggestions because it's probably gonna be shaded that area since it's under a big tree, and you don't want something that's like super tall so that it can kind of look nice around the tree. Um, so some suggestions would be red columbine is a lovely plant that doesn't get too tall. It has really bright red flowers, and then the foliage is also really pretty. Coreopsis, there's a fair amount of different species of Coreopsis, but some of them don't get too tall. They all have like a really bright yellow flower, um, and don't need some of them don't need a ton of sun. Purple coneflower is always an easy one to find to buy, and is pretty. It's got purple flowers, blooms for a relatively long time. Um, and then the other one I thought of was Downy gentian. Sorry. Um, and it's another like lower growing, can tolerate shade. Um, and it's like a really nice kind of medium blue flower. So any of those, they're all native to the Midwest and have bright, bright, brightly colored flowers. Um, just making sure that I didn't miss anything. I still have a couple more. Um, Caitlin asked me, what design software do I use for landscape? Um, so currently I mostly just use Adobe Illustrator. It's like what I use for pretty much everything. If I'm just like sketching and brainstorming, I'll draw it by hand. Um, but I'll do it in Illustrator for the final product just because I want to get the proportions and measurements right. And it's a lot easier to do that digitally than by hand with a ruler, especially for me personally. Um, when I don't do much like rendering currently, which would be like a 3D model, just because I don't like doing it. But when I had to for school, I used SketchUp a lot, and I used Revit. Um, those were the main ones. And then I have like this super like cheap like knockoff rendering software that I don't even know what it's called, but it was like really cheap and I needed to make a quick rendering. Um, but mostly I use Illustrator because I before in my past life I was an illustrator slash graphic designer. I have my bachelor's degree is in illustration. Did 4 years of art school. It was a mistake. But it is, comes in handy every once in a while, I guess. Um, I think there's one more. Evergreen Eclectic. I don't know what your actual first name is. It was not on your Instagram. But I'm sure that you prefer it that way. So Evergreen Eclectic asked, how did you fall in love with horticulture? Um, I just have always loved plants. So I grew up, my parents' house is I think they call it a flag lot. So it's like the regular subdivision, and then houses are all here, and then my parents' house is behind. Oh God, I'm gone. It's like behind all the other houses in the woods, and there's like several acres of woods. I don't own it all, but I was just like able to run free in the woods as a child from the time I was like way too young to be by myself until I moved out when I was in my early 20s. Um, so I spent just a lot of time in nature in this area that was like, pretty undisturbed. I mean, it's full of invasives and shit, obviously, because there's just so many everywhere that they spread to wild areas. But there's like a creek there, and like I just spent a lot of time alone in the woods, and I always have just loved plants. So then when I moved out of my parents' house, I started gardening. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was just kind of like winging it, trial and error, which personally I think is a great way to garden. As long as you're not using like pesticides and shit. Um, so I gardened I mean, I do still garden, have gardened for about 10 years. Um, I really like growing stuff from seeds. I always have. I remember being like a really small child, like maybe like 5, and I like pulled a tomato seed out of a tomato and planted it and gave the plant to my mom for Mother's Day, and she was like so impressed, and I was like, there are seeds in tomatoes, so why would you not put those seeds in the dirt and grow tomato plants? Um, but then I've always as long as I've been gardening, there's like the winter rolls around and I have seasonal depression, seasonal mood stuff. So it's like winter comes and it fucks up my mood, and then it also all my plants go dormant. So when I moved into my house now, this house has a lot of windows. So I got into house plants when I moved here at first because I was like, I want plants in the winter to keep me sane. Um, and then that turned into planted aquariums. So I have fish tanks that are full of aquatic plants, and those are kind of like my indoor gardens for when I can't garden outside. Um, and then so I said that I used to be a graphic designer slash illustrator. Um, turns out it's hard to make a living as an artist. And I worked in marketing for a little while. And then I got just life hit me really hard. My dad had a brain aneurysm, and it was a very traumatic event for my whole family. And my marketing job at the time was not accommodating, and they accused me of lying about it, and it was a whole thing. Very toxic place to begin with. Um, And so I quit that job, and then I was like, what do I do? And I was like, I know that I love plants. I know that the only thing at this time going through this traumatic event that was keeping me relatively sane was gardening. Um, and I decided to go back to school. And that's when I got my graduate degree. And yeah, it's just been a lifelong passion. I've always loved plants and I always will. And they're amazing. And I love all the non-human living things. I love all the animals, all the plants. Um, it's just, I don't know, it's just who it is who I am. And I also like part of going back to school was wanting to be a part of something bigger than myself. Making art felt kind of in the ego area, and I felt like my brain could be used for something more directly helpful to the world. And then starting grad school, I learned about all the details and the horrors of the climate crisis. Obviously, I knew climate change was happening, but I had to learn all of the terrible, scary realities of it. And that just has fueled me more to want to teach people about how we can do things um, that help the planet, that help the wildlife and the plants and just the whole earth, and things that we can do in direct action, regardless of what the government does and what corporations do. We can always grow plants, and that is helpful. So hopefully that answered that. I think that's everything. Let me quickly make sure I answered everything. Okay, yes, that's everything. So thank you everybody who asked questions. Um, you can always DM me or email me if you have more questions or if you want more information about anything I talked about, or you need help with something, hit me up. I love to help. And I will talk to you soon. Goodbye.